Hello to our New Zealand listeners. Powrup is coming to a city near you. If you're in Wellington, Christchurch or Auckland, we've specially designed a 4-week program to help you bust through those beliefs and habits that are holding you back. Come and join some of our very first leadership cohorts in June and July. We even have an email template to help you get professional development budget. So reach out at hello@powrup.com and we look forward to meeting you in person. Welcome to Powrup, the podcast that uncovers the unique challenges women leaders face today. Join your hosts Nat and Kristen as we dive into the tough topics and provide actionable insights you can apply right now. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes.
Hello, thanks for listening. Today we're chatting about something very similar to podcasting, which is public speaking. Podcasting to an audience, it probably feels like, which is very different in a way, as soon as you have an audience in front of you, life feels very different.
And it is part of our leadership journey that we get given opportunities to speak, and so we need to practice doing that, which directly supports our mission to give you the tools and the confidence to build a career on your terms. But it's scary, isn't it?
Yes. And do you find it scary? Do
Yes.
you get nervous?
Yes.
Yeah, I think, I get extremely nervous. I did debating in high school and partially to get rid of my nerves because, practice makes perfect.
Yeah.
It didn't. I stayed equally as nervous every time.
I feel more confident in my ability. Like when I get asked, I might feel a few butterflies and I say yes to the opportunity. The Power of Yes, one of our podcasts, and why you might put yourself out of your comfort zone. Please have a listen to that. But then I know, because I've done it before, I back myself to deliver it. So there's this calm about it all.
It's getting comfortable, being uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you imagine everyone naked?
No, I don't.
I don't even know how. I've got too much else on my mind to figure out what everyone might look like naked.
I don't know how that. I feed off the audience though. And so one of the 3 points today is really about how to start to connect and engage with humans. And I am an extrovert. I get energy from humans. And so while you're giving a speech is the perfect time to get energy from humans.
I wouldn't understand what that's like as an introvert.
As an introvert. You went on this weird introvert thing, Nat. I'm like, everyone, she's not an introvert.
Do you know why it's scary? Do you know what the reason is behind why we all get so nervous?
You're going to tell me the answer, but I think it's fear of failure and looking stupid in front of people.
Yeah, I think there's probably layers of fear. There's multiple layers.
Yeah.
But there is apparently a real biological issue or reason, which is way, way, way back in the day. And actually even now, if you are out at night or if you are out on your own and there are eyes on you, that is a threat, right? Like our body is trained to see eyes watching you as something that we should be afraid of.
Yes.
And so when you are standing on stage, it's a very unnatural thing. I'm not sure in cave people times if people were giving speeches in front of the fire.
The Neanderthal chiefs would have.
It's one of those classic things that we still grapple with today, that our body can't tell the difference between the psychological fear and the physical fear. And so it's really ingrained into us. So I think that idea of anyone who doesn't get nervous is probably not true. Or, and to your point about that fear of failure, I think the other layer, the top layer for me is I want to give people a good experience, and the idea of having this crowd of people have a miserable time or be bored out of their brains is a real worry for me.
That's what will make you an excellent speech giver, because you have empathy and you care about what the outcome of the audience is. And we'll get to that exactly why.
Well, let's hope it works.
So the 3 things we're going to chat about today, and then give an action and find little ways to practice. The first is preparing your speech. The second is practicing your speech. And the third is delivering your speech. And
Can we change it to presenting? Preparing, practicing, presenting.
Oh, 3 Ps.
The 3 Ps.
Boom, boom.
What a missed opportunity. We're normally quite good at those.
Great. Let's talk about the first P, which is preparing your speech. And we're just going to give a few tips each, really.
Oh, now I'm on a roll. Power preparing, power practicing. Sorry, you got take it back.
Natalie's branding over here. My tip for preparing your speech is exactly what Nat just touched on, is your speech when you're getting up, and we'll use the term loosely. It could be to a smattering of curious souls, or it could be to a massive auditorium. Let's just use that term speech loosely. You are getting up and talking about something. The first rule or tip I have to give is it is about your audience. It is not about you. So when you are asked to speak, you have to deeply consider, what is it that they need to hear? And so the last couple times, as an example, I've been asked to give speeches or talks at conferences. And so I have to know exactly who is in the room, what the topic of the conversation is, what are some of the other speakers speaking about or likely to speak about, and what is it that that audience needs to hear on that day at that unique time in history that you get an opportunity to feed into them. And that is, for me, the grounding of providing that value and walking away with people going, man, that was good.
Sounds really easy.
You are curious, and you're curious about people. So that is an obvious first step for you.
And I think it's that confidence thing again of when you're feeling unconfident, which standing in front of an audience can make a lot of us feel, you get selfish, you start thinking about yourself. Whereas this is a really great, what you've just said, way of reversing that and getting out of yourself and selflessly thinking about, what can I deliver? What gift can I give?
Yes.
What can these people take away?
Yes.
That would be amazing for them.
Which quickly leads to my second point, then I can hand it over to you because you segued quite nicely, was your story and your unique experiences. It could be the learnings in your role. It could be you've done a bit of research. It could be you've had an interesting journey where you've picked up some tips and interesting insight along the way, or it could be your story is unique to you. So you can be selfish about that. You can actually recognize your talk is uniquely yours, and no one has lived a life through your lens, and no one has your story. People love to hear stories. It's why children every nighttime before bed want to hear stories, because we listen to people's individual stories because they're always new, they're always refreshing. And so you think, of course, about what the audience needs to hear and how you might tailor, but then you rely on your lived experiences, your stories, your experiences, because they're uniquely yours. And I can promise you they'll go over amazingly well.
I love that. And I think all of us can imagine all the things we've learned, and the things you learn through storytelling stick. Like when you hear a story of a great person delivering a great thing, climbing a mountain, movies, TV, books, whatever, it's the story, and you get messages out of those. You get the moral of the story. So it's the method of delivering information. And I agree. I love a good story. The other thing that I've heard, and actually you told me this initially and then I Googled it and it turns out it's a thing, is the rule of 3. And we have it with interior design. It's a thing as well. People like clusters of 3 things.
And photography as well.
Yeah, 3 different layers. Humans love 3s. And also 3 is an easy number to remember. So or an easy amount to remember. So if you break your talk into 3 key points, or a beginning, middle, and end, 3 parts, that will have much bigger impact as well. So I love that idea of storytelling, and I think you've taught me this as well, of what's point 1, what's point 2, what's point 3, and what's a story you can tell for each one of those points that really conveys that point. Bam, done.
Yeah, yes, yeah. An example of that could have been, I think I had to give a Zoom presentation. I was invited to, this was during the COVID times, and it was to women in sales, and they were sales leaders. And I just thought they're probably feeling alone because they are in a predominantly male dominated industry, and all of the emotional baggage that comes in with that. So I talked about, I think it was stepping out of comfort zone or fear of failure. So I knew I knew what they needed to hear, that they're not alone. And in fact, we all have this feeling of being alone and it being really hard and swimming upstream, for example. And so all I had to do was think, what are the 3 times in my life where I felt that? And then what I did about them. And so I was able to work back through my career, and I didn't tell my whole career story, but I just told these unique points in time where it was like, I remember when, and then it related back to this concept of I felt really uncomfortable, and this is how I pushed through it. And then there was another time and so yeah, that was the rule of 3 that really worked, I think.
I love that. And I think you unintentionally or intentionally added another one there, which is that vulnerability and relatability. We sometimes feel we need to present this perfect front to the world. But again, I think if everyone actually thinks back to the most powerful talks they've heard or the most powerful stories they've heard, it's often triumph over failure and big mistakes and how you work through them. And that was, me the other day, I went to give a talk, and it's really odd. It was a long time since I'd thought about this example that I'd given. And I rang Kristen saying, every time I started thinking about it throughout the day, I started crying. And I was like, it's fine though. The nerves will take over. I'll get up on stage. And of course, burst into tears, which I was so unprepared for and so embarrassed about. But how many people came up to me afterwards saying they'd been through something really similar and it really resonated. And so I kind of let go of the embarrassment, and they all told me not to be embarrassed, but to realize that that's the stuff people connect with. The perfect stuff no one does, because no one feels perfect. So watching someone tell the story about how great they are and how everything's worked out well, it doesn't resonate with most of us, because most of us have real challenges. So don't be afraid to show off that side, I think.
Yeah, I went to one of the most perfect talks at an event earlier this year, and you could tell it was perfectly rehearsed and it was perfectly delivered, but it had such a veneer on it that you couldn't break through to the human who was delivering the speech. And I felt terribly for him, because he would have practiced it for months and months and months on end to the point where everything was so perfect, but I couldn't relate to him, because I was like, oh man, if anything, it just creates a barrier in between you and the speaker, because you don't relate. And sometimes a lot of women talks, international women's talks, they put these incredible women on panels, and then they have to, because they're media personalities or they're in the spotlight, some of them don't get vulnerable, and then you really don't relate. How are you supposed to go, well, I'm just this person trying to muddle through, I don't relate to what you're saying? But often they're hiding that vulnerability, I think.
I agree. I also feel like every time most people have been to a conference or listened to TED Talks, I think TED Talks are another one that you could have Obama on, and of course that's going to be incredible and inspirational. But one of the most powerful TED Talks I've heard was from this guy, and I don't know which part of Africa he was from, but he built a windmill to power his town. And there was something so human and so impressive about it that I think those are the stories that end up sticking. And like, even now I could pluck that from the top of my head, and when you think, again, if everyone thinks back to the things that really worked for them, chances are that storytelling, vulnerable, human, 3 examples, 3 points, that's the ticket. You don't need to go off that. Like, it's kind of set in concrete as a really good way of doing things.
Great. What about slides?
Yeah, slides are, I always point to Steve Jobs, but I remember the first time I heard about this was a New Zealand company called Trade Me, which started because Amazon never came and eBay never came to New Zealand. And the first time I saw someone presenting from Trade Me, and they had a picture, just a photo on each slide, and one of them was a graph, one of them was a picture of the homepage, one of them was a picture of something else. And it was the first time I'd seen simple slides. And now it's, of course, a thing. But I think if you think about your slides as a add-on rather than the main event, you're winning. So people are coming to look at you and listen to you. Adding a whole bunch of information to your slides now is splitting their focus between you and this other thing. And it actually overwhelms people, and it causes them to lose focus, and it probably means they leave without getting that powerful story you're telling.
Yeah, and a good way to do that is either through imagery, which you've done, Nat, is you've had a really powerful image that represents a point that you want to get across, or you could just have 2 keywords, the message that you want people to get out of that point that you're getting across. I think
the easiest trick there is when you've written up your slides and you've got about 50 words on each one, take them out and put them in your speaker's notes, and then figure out from there what's the one, because people often use them to refer to. You've got speaker's notes, take that, but what's the one thing that would sum up what you're talking about? Yeah. And there's so many easy things. Canva, what a godsend, right? Like, if you haven't used Canva yet, get in there. It's got all sorts of templates.
Yeah, everyone's a designer.
Yeah. Well, but it's like, it's set up for you. There's no excuses anymore. You can look professional with like the click of a button. It's great.
So preparing your speech, there's not a perfect way to do it, but the rule of 3 works. I've heard other people that go, tell people what you're going to say it, and then remind them of what you said. And that could be if you've got some research that you want to present. But storytelling in any aspect of life, which is your unique lived experience, is so powerful. You will never fail in a speech if you have a little bit of that vulnerability and your personal stories.
Great. Yeah. I agree.
Good. Practicing your speech. This is time consuming, and you can often tell those that have done so and those that haven't. The biggest no-no, I have to say it, please do not read off screeds of paper. You will have lost the connection of the audience. You will have lost the emotive tone in your voice, your hand gestures, everything. Do not read off your speech. But let's talk about what does work.
Yeah, I feel like that one is an interesting one because I think we can get to that in the presentation part of removing blockers and barriers between you and your audience. Again, all of us can remember going to maybe a wedding or a christening or any sort of birthday party where speeches are given, and you can tell the difference between those who've really put the time into and the respect into the audience, and those who maybe have gone, I'm a natural speaker, I'm great, I talk off the cuff, and they've rambled, they've gone on tangents. and practicing, I feel like sometimes we have these really weird ideas in society about you're meant to be gifted at speaking and you're natural. There's no such thing. I guarantee the best speakers in the world spend hours, weeks, months practicing because it's so important to get right, that delivery.
Yes, and it doesn't have to be memorized. Nat and I did a small pitch on the weekend, which was 5 minutes, and because we shared it, it's about 2.5 minutes each. It went really well, and we memorized that. The reason we memorized it was because the format was to a room full of potential investors and stakeholders, and it was really important to get those key. It's a very startup thing to do. You get the key points across. It's not like a speech to inspire. It is a speech to influence people that this is a big problem you're solving. You are the right people to solve it, and this is the solution that's going to, blow the socks off everyone. So in that case, that was a memorized speech, but we would recommend kind of not memorizing. Usually you're going to speak for 5 to 10, 15 minutes. And so, but getting really comfortable with your speech is very important, and those key points.
Well, I think in the other thing, 5 minutes, it's short. And also they clapped at 5 minutes. So if you didn't get everything covered, and a few people didn't,
clapped you off.
Because if you didn't have it covered, you wouldn't be able to get it all across. Whereas in normal life, you got a little bit more leeway than that. And I think all those same rules apply. The preparing absolutely apply. The practicing, it's funny. I've tried so many different ways, but I think for me, the way my brain works is the sooner I can write down some notes, the better. And then I start pondering those notes over the couple of days, and then I go back and kind of structure them a bit more. And then I use every opportunity, like throughout the day, I might wake up in the morning and open my notes and have a read through, and then at lunchtime do it again, and keep iterating until close to the day I actually don't need those notes anymore, and I might write 3 points on my hand or something, or have 3 points and notes in front of me if I need to refer to them. But it's actually just going through that process.
You're really comfortable with what you've prepared, so you're now able to extract your 3 points. And so if you go off-piste a little bit, or you don't say things exactly how you've originally written them, it doesn't matter because you're really comfortable with that section. And I think that's the point we get to, is past memorization of going, I'm so comfortable with the little anecdote I share in this section that underlines this point I'm trying to get across. And if you end up introducing another one, which I tend to do off the cuff, it's okay because I can come back to my point and then move on to the next one. And so whereas memorized speeches, if it's not a pitch, you can tell they're memorized, and that was what this fellow is doing, that I just saw right through it. I was like, oh, it's just too rehearsed, it's too perfect.
Memorizing is quite interesting because there's the word for word memorizing, and then to that earlier point about really making it for your audience, you are there to tell your story. You should know your story inside out. So it's actually, you're not memorizing anything. You already know it. So really having that confidence is, I really know it, and all I need to do is make sure I'm hitting these 3 points.
Yes.
You're actually fine.
Yes.
And you introduced me to a new trick, which I really liked.
Well, I have 2 tricks that I use, and this is...
She only shared one with me.
I didn't tell you about the other one.
She hasn't shared her IP.
I didn't share the other one. But what I did do is, if it's short enough and you do want to get really comfortable, I record myself on my phone, and while I'm walking into work or walking the dog, I'll listen to it, and I can actually practice while I'm listening to myself, which is strange. Now that is in the event that it had to be memorized. We could not go over 5 minutes. And that was the structure of the speech. But I actually still do it with longer ones because I just want to so get comfortable and confident that if I step up there, I know, not to travel too far from those general areas. And so I do listen. I record myself and listen to myself. So that's the first tip.
Great.
Do you want to hear my second?
I would love to. I would love to share your other
This
tip.
isn't my IP because I Googled this ages ago and I have subsequently used it and it's worked really well. And you take a room that you're really comfortable with, and I take my lounge. And when you're walking in, you basically create the speech around your room, and you place the speech on different items around the room. So that when you get up in front of the stage, all you have to do is visualize yourself going through for me, it was my living room, my lounge. And so you walk into the door, that's your intro. So I walk into my living room and I go, I'm Kristen, this is why I'm here, this is why you should care. And then I go to the first item, which happens to be a piano, and I will associate a piece of my speech with that piano. And it'll make sense. It'll be either about music or it'll be about whatever that I go, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense. And then I go to the plant in the corner and I associate the next thing. And then I go to the buffet and then
I'm looking around your lounge going, I'm going to use your lounge too.
Yeah, and then I do the TV and so then if you find yourself getting stuck, if you don't want to go back to your notes, which you absolutely can, and that's a very normal and natural thing to do, you just go, what's the next item in my lounge? And then I go, oh, the TV, right, this point. And then, you can carry on. So it's this real visual way of remembering those key points and stories throughout the speech. And once you finish back at your door, you close out.
How very mega memory of you. Do you remember mega memory?
No.
It was this whole, I think it was even a cassette kit that you could order, and it would do things like for people's names that you'd say, hi, I'm Kristen. And I'd go, Kristen is like a cat who's sitting on a hat. And so I have a cat and a hat in my head. And every time I see her, I'm like, cat in the hat, because Kristen's the cat on the hat.
It's so associating imagery with important facts.
Yes, which I've never used, but it's a really good one. I thought you were going to say a room exercise that we learnt from this incredible person, Kit, which I think is a great practicing technique as well. And they said, so you've got your pitch, because we were working on our pitches, but this would apply to anything. Now do it again, but pretend you're doing it to a 5-year-old. And how would you simplify it right down and explain this concept to a 5-year-old? Okay, what if you did it now in the style of an infomercial? And this is, again, do it in the privacy of your own house, but challenge or do it in front of a couple of friends, or do it with a couple of friends if you're doing something together. How do you kind of break out of that fear and that, all the normal stuff? How do you trick yourself, really? But also what they said, which I really liked as well, is from each one, you might take a thing or two and you might scrap the rest. And that's okay, because this is all about finding the joy in it.
Shall we move to presenting?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I already get nerves just thinking about presenting.
This is the scariest part. And the scariest part is just before you get introduced and walk onto the stage. Oh my goodness. We're just, oh my goodness.
Have a bucket ready so you can throw up.
We were so nervous. And even though you know it, they're on your side. They want you to succeed. It's a safe space. People want to hear from you. It's awful. Your brain just does all
just
these.
Like it's blank.
Yeah.
But the thing that I've learned, and I actually think I accidentally do this, but a few people have told me, but now I try and challenge myself to, is let's start with the walk in. And the first thing you should do when we're talking about sort of breaking down those barriers between you and your audience to make that connection, to tell your story, to connect, is look at them as you're walking in. Give them a big smile and walk in. Engage with them from that first moment. And what I tend to notice when I see people talk is they wait until they're started. So they sort of kind of creep on stage. They don't look at anyone. They get sorted and then they turn and look. That first part is your first opportunity to get them to connect with you.
That's good. I like that. And then just start. I love that. I love the idea of getting out behind the podium. I think it's a huge barrier between you and the stage. And if you've seen people, standing out front of that or walking on the stage, there's just nothing in between you and that speaker. So even if I have my notes on the podium, I make sure I even step to the side of it and I can walk away a little bit, have a little wander. But if I need to go back to the podium to look at a note, I do. But then there's nothing in between me and the crowd.
I love that. And I think going back to the reason why we're afraid is you're worried about these eyes on you. So we instinctively put blockers between us, barriers. And we even just went out for breakfast this morning, and the person we went out for breakfast with removed everything from the table because, they put the drink bottles and stick things and and she just moved it to the side to remove those barriers because, and again, I read this, which actually intuitively makes sense to me. The more you remove the barriers between you and your audience, the more you connect with them, and therefore the less nervous you are, because you now are just having a conversation rather than having these walls up around you.
Yeah, and you can have your notes on the podium and you can step back and remember that point, and no one will fault you for it.
I've seen multiple people forget halfway through and go, I'm just going to quickly check my notes. And everyone's like, obviously. Great. Off you go.
Because you're not going to memorize a 20-minute speech, right? So
we're fine with that.
It's okay to be moving and going back and forth. I don't love the idea. I've once given a speech with a phone in my hands as a crutch. And I don't love that. I think because you should be using your hands as you speak. And so to get that tool, because it is a crutch, out of your hand and onto something, and you can ask in advance if there's something there you can place your phone on, and to actually just be able to use your hands.
I'm a huge fan of that because I always use that crutch, and I've been trying to train myself out of it. But one of the big lessons I feel like I learned last week is tech has moved so far that now virtually every opportunity to speak in front of a reasonable crowd, there will be some sort of speaker's note, slide deck, podium, something. So if you are a nervous talker like me, check in advance, because we found out at the last moment we could have just left some speaker's notes on our slides and that would have saved a lot of stress for us. But writing on your hand, like I've never done that before, but I really liked that because it was like I had 3 notes on my wrist, not on my palms because I was worried they'd sweat off. And just like I knew I could look at my hand if I needed to.
And in another intimate setting, I remember going into a room, and it was during a tech week, and there was a stool up front, and I do remember sitting on the stool just to have it be a little bit less formal, and so I was still open to the room, but I actually sat on the stool and talked, and it created for a really intimate setting. And now let's talk quickly about messing up.
Yeah, well, I did this on Thursday. I had a total brain blank, and I never have done that before. I'm always worried I'm going to do it, but I've never done it before. And it's always great having one of those things happen, because you're like, oh, this is worst case scenario, and now I know what it feels like. And it was halfway through one of the little portions I had to say. We had this clock counting down in front of us, and I just remembered to revert to take a breath, think again, and then start again. And it was like a little bit awkward, but I got through it. And I think that
was only awkward to you.
Well, I don't know. I had those notes at the side of the stage, so just knowing that I had that backup calmed me, because I was like, worst case, I'm going over there. But I think with one breath, and we all know in any situation where you're nervous, a breath is always like the most helpful thing.
Yeah. Well, and you probably felt it more because it wasn't awkward for me or the audience, but that taking the breath, stopping and restarting.
Well, and unlike in cave people times, the audience are on your side. They're not looking to eat you alive. They're actually looking to support you. So they're all willing you to recover. They're all willing you to go on. And there's something, when you were talking about that connection, there's something so empowering in having this whole crowd of people going, we want you to succeed. Like, that's pretty cool.
And then because you've prepped these really simple slides, you do not have to refer to them unless you are giving some sort of academic research. Fine, fair point. But if you are getting up, and giving just a message, you're sharing something, again, you do not need to refer to your slides. You don't have to point to them. You don't have to read off them. They're there. Know that they're there. They're just supporting and accompanying your speech, and they should just be gone. And so I knew the different points where I had to click the thing to change based on what we were chatting about, but that's it. And the audience loved, there were a number of speeches that day, pitches that day, and you could tell the funny images that really, like, people just loved. Humans love funny imagery, and so be really creative and brave when it comes to that. I love
funny. Like, I think especially, and I think that thing about the scientific stuff, or we've seen it before with finance, and I think it is even more true in those things, because what you've suddenly got is a crowd of people trying to analyze this very complicated chart, completely ignoring what you're saying. That stuff can come later. In most talks that you deliver, you can send a follow-up email with all the supporting information. That's like a written format thing. I think the key with all this stuff, especially if it's complex, is how do you distill it down to something simple? And I love, one of my personal challenges back at Hatch Days, was every talk I gave, I just used the cheesiest stock images and just really embraced it. It was a fast, easy tool because there's a lot of free stock photo sites. And I remember things like, one of the things I was talking about is wealth doesn't mean what we think it does. So I was looking up like the most ridiculous private jets, and it gives that light relief. And like, what's the difference between small habits and finance, and putting up a picture of like a really steroided out big muscle man. And it's like, again, it supports that storytelling of like, now people have a visual picture in their head of the point you're saying, but it's so easy. And I think even if you're talking about something really serious, that light relief is that connection thing again.
Yeah, well, we're just all humans, right? So I hope that helped, the 3 Ps: preparing your speech, practicing your speech, and presenting your speech. We're now just going to go into a bit of action just very quickly the last couple of minutes, in that this is your opportunity. You might not be asked to a conference to give a speech. However, there are a number of ways to use and raise your voice, from leading a team meeting to getting up and saying a quick few words about someone on your team that's leaving the company, about getting up at a board meeting and talking. This is your opportunity where you should again be using some of these points. Who is the audience? What do they need to hear? Who are you honoring? And it's not yourself. You can practice what you're going to say. What are the 3 key things you want to get across? And then delivering it. How can you make it the most human as possible, so the audience understands, they connect with you, and it can be every day you can be practicing these things, ain't it?
Absolutely. I think they can come right down to a micro level. Performance reviews, a team meeting, all hands, all of those sorts of things. All of these things are equipping us with these critical leadership skills. And it's like winning lotto. Don't wait till you're rich to use them. Like, don't wait till you're in front of a crowd to start practicing this. Start with small and start thinking, how do I make 3 points? All of those sorts of things. I would also say find an opportunity. And I went to a midwinter Christmas party in the weekend, and my parents actually set this up about a decade ago, and then a friend took the concept and moved it to the other island in New Zealand. And part of the rule is you have to come with what we call a ditty, like a little performance, which is so confronting. But now I've had over a decade of experience with this. It's a really funny journey you watch people go on. They resent it, they hate it, they're so nervous, they try and bow out of it, they come up with every excuse, they turn up on the night. Someone did a magic trick, she'd found a magic trick. Someone else did a really funny thing about unskilled skills, where they had to stand up and say, who can curl their tongue, who can do this, who can do this, all the way through to someone played the ukulele, all sorts of stuff, reading poetry. And at the end, after each one, people have you can see this real dopamine hit of like, this group was cheering me on. I did the thing. I thought I couldn't do it, and I did it. And then the next year they turn up and they have 10 times better because they now understand it. And it just made me think, we can create these opportunities. If that's something that you and your peer group or a couple of friends want to practice, you have these opportunities to do it. You can create them and just get comfortable doing it, and you'll get a lot out of it.
And we know a few people who've even signed up to improv, totally out of their comfort zones. They're just doing it because they're so freaked about public speaking, and it is a great way to actually learn leadership skills as well.
Absolutely. Toastmasters is another one.
Yep.
In New Zealand, and I'm sure around the world, there's some incredible professional speaking coaches who hold public workshops. And if you go along, and even the other thing I've learned a lot in life is, next time you listen to someone else speaking, rather than just listening to what they're saying, take note of how did they structure it? How did they interact with the audience? And really start to build your own playbook for the things that you might want to do.
Yeah, what worked and what didn't. I love it. I hope that was helpful, everyone. You can find out more on powersuit.com, where you can also subscribe to our newsletter. You're on our podcast right now. Please hit follow and give us 5 stars so that more and more people are hearing our words of wisdom. And we will catch you next time. Bye.